Thank you so much for being here, and welcome to the Climate Hub at Davos. We are an open and solutions-oriented space, bringing together leaders across different sections to come up with actionable actions for the climate space. The interview is being recorded on behalf of Renat, which is a Swiss-based NGO that is focused on bringing together solutions for climate change. We're very delighted to have Marco Hirsbrunner and Renat Heuberger, co-founders of South Pole and early pioneers in translating climate solutions into tangible actions. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us, Annika.
Through South Pole, Marco and Renat have developed carbon projects, generated and sold carbon credits, and advised both buyers and policymakers, giving a really rare end-to-end connection of carbon credits throughout the entire system. We're here together on the occasion of the new book, The Carbon Paradox, which really discusses the different paradigms and the challenges of functioning carbon markets. The book is a novel that turns the abstract mechanics of the carbon markets into really an engaging and accessible climate fiction grounded in a real-world experience. And it centers around 3 students that navigate this entire environment. Thank you, Renat and Marco, for being here tonight. We're really excited to turn this conversation and look more into what your book is about and how it can help us navigate carbon markets. I'm just going to start off with a very kind of simple question to introduce this topic. Why did you choose to write it as a novel and not as a kind of more factual and science-based book?
So the answers are quite simple, right? We've both been in climate for the past 2 to 3 decades. There's so many textbooks, there's so many scientific books. The problem is the public audience doesn't read those. So we thought we want to write a book that is much more accessible for people outside of our climate bubble. In fact, I always had my mother in mind, who is 80 years old, a psychologist, another climate expert. She should be able to understand the book. If she does, I hope we can create a much bigger movement and create much more understanding about what's actually going on in climate action for the wider public.
Yeah, and for me, maybe it goes the other way around. I really thought about my children, and I really want to actually have something that I can read to my children, to make them engage, to make them understand the last 20 years in the climate movement. Where were the roadblocks? What have we achieved? What didn't we achieve? And so I think that's what we tried to do. And on top of that, it was just much more fun to write a novel.
That's true.
Carbon markets is interesting because we've seen so many different developments over the last years, from becoming a big topic and very popular in the investment space to kind of gradually losing interest again. Why do you think it's an interesting topic to write about now? Why is this a topic that you kind of chose to bring to the attention of the climate and sustainable investment space again?
Well, I mean, the climate change doesn't just pause, right? Just because we're distracted with AI and with all sorts of geopolitical situations, climate change is advancing. The physical reality is there. So we definitely don't just sit around and do nothing, right? So it was for us a logical step to take a little bit of break, take a little bit kind of a step back to look at the whole situation, write down what we've learned, to then actually start on that ground with new climate action.
Yeah, and I think what's very important, I think what you just mentioned, right, is ups and downs of carbon markets. This is a very important topic for the entire community, not even beyond climate, even for nature, water, biodiversity, because the paradoxes we describe are applicable way beyond carbon markets. And I find it very important that we understand a few realities that constantly hinder the growth of the solutions we all promote. And that's why we wrote the book. I think we are as Marco said, we're still at the crossroad. We have different pathways where the world can go. And we just figured it's very important that these realities are opened on the table. We can discuss about them, understand them, and then create better system to address them.
It's definitely going to contribute to people being much more understanding of the market, I'm sure. In the Carbon Paradox, in the book, you describe 25 different challenges and kind of how they hinder the market from actually growing. Is there any kind of one of these challenges in particular that you think is kind of much more stronger or powerful than some of these other challenges?
Yeah, definitely. And there are some paradoxes that are really very specific to the carbon world, but others are kind of more relevant for the overall sustainability movement. So take, for example, the ideologies paradox, where you suddenly see meaningful action being obstructed not only by the political right, but also by the extreme left. Like we had it here in Switzerland with the climate law that was then in the end voted against by a majority of 51.6% it was. Just because the right was saying, oh, that's far too much that we're doing. We don't need to do so much for the climate. And the radical left said, it's far too little. And so they opposed it as well, which is insane. But you have these situations, and it's a paradox, of course.
And another one I like to flag, because it's something everybody has heard. It's something so simple, but I think it's important we talk about it. We call it the expectations paradox. The moment you have the intention to do something good, at that moment, the expectations on your results are going through the roof. So you have the situation that, let's say you're planting a forest. People come and say, well, if that's the case, you should make sure you have all the inclusion, all the women's rights, all the malaria prevention, so you're loading up, and all those topics are relevant. Don't get me wrong. The problem is that the expectations are so high that many of us in that space can only fail against those absolutely high expectations. And then I say, if you're building a coal plant or rebuilding an oil platform, nobody expects you to do all those steps. That's only if you're doing something good. And I know that this happens not only in carbon, it happens in impact investments, it happens in the whole circularity industry. So it's a common pattern that if you go on a kind of high integrity platform, you create expectations that are so high that it's very difficult to meet. And that the risk of you failing is much higher as opposed to you not having any good intentions at all. And that's a paradox, isn't it?
Yeah, the enemies of carbon action, of climate action, and of sustainability in general, they have a very easy play, right? So they can just take any kind of any one of these expectations and dig really deeply, so deep until they find a point where you didn't fulfill like the highest standards of expectations, and then they can scream scandal, which is of course really complete double standard. Absolutely.
That's setting the bar very high and very difficult to reach at the same time. If, of course, now carbon markets should be about managing carbon. If you would say, please lower your expectations and look maybe at only one or two other areas in which we should be doing good, what is something that you would kind of prioritize?
You mean outside of carbon?
Biodiversity, definitely, for me.
Yeah.
I tend to agree. And of course, the obvious answer would be poverty alleviation. But what I find very interesting, or not interesting, actually shocking, is that if you look at currently the big crisis in the world, for example, Sudan, the crisis in South Sudan, what is actually the root cause that creates that disaster, that absolute disaster? One of the root causes is that Sudan hasn't seen much rain. It's gone dry, and the nomads in the north have nothing more to farm. So those are actually conflicts for resources. Of course, there's many other reasons as well, but I'm just saying that the climate topic is underpinning a lot of other conflict that are currently keeping the world in a difficult space.
Yeah, I would agree, we have so many different challenges at the moment that it's very difficult to solve everything with just one instrument. That's why the financial markets also have many different ways to solve for some of these issues. Kind of coming a little bit back more to the carbon markets itself, you've seen the carbon markets grow over the last kind of couple of years, and you've seen so many different developments. What would you say is one kind of mechanism in the way that the system is designed, which is really making it difficult to be adopted more?
Offsetting is definitely very controversial, right? So I think that was in hindsight a mistake. It was very logical for an economist, but the wider public didn't really embrace it. And in hindsight, a wiser strategy would have been to really say, okay, we're just reducing emissions as much as we can in, let's say, a company or a country. And once we have a political agreement on how far we can get to kind of reasonably reduce our emissions by a certain year, then we start a new discussion. And that new discussion is about how do we actually then, on top of that, also finance climate action outside our boundaries. And that is also what we should do in the future, actually.
Yeah. And I think to put in a little bit of a different angle, I think it's important to take a step back also and ask what was actually the idea behind carbon markets. And in our book, The Carbon Paradox, the first part is called The Dream. And the last part is called The Rebirth of the Dream. And what was the dream actually? Sometimes we lose that dream and get bogged down in all the paradoxes. But I think, what was the dream? The dream was actually very simple. The dream was to have a global financing mechanism, since you mentioned finance, where the cleaner earns money. Like if you plant a tree, you get money, and the polluter pays. And our dream was, if that worked globally and the price was high enough, you could essentially fix the problem by capitalism, by market mechanisms. And if that works, you could actually do the same for biodiversity, for water, for health, for even. And that was really the dream, that with the right financial instruments, we could actually stop these massive debates and simply solve the problem using our most powerful tool, namely market mechanism. That was the idea behind it. And you would then wonder, so what happened? Why did that dream basically got under so much scrutiny? And let's keep in mind, I mean, it's ridiculous. The whole market is perhaps a couple of billion. It's like a fraction of the oil market, for example. It's even 40 times smaller than the chewing gum market. Can you imagine? It's tiny, but still it got so much controversy. And we wanted to understand in this book, why is that? Why is this dream, which is supposed to inspire us, getting into so much trouble? And how could we unstuck it?
Thank you. This is definitely really interesting insight. If kind of listeners of this podcast or participants of the overall Davos Climate Hub could think about carbon markets in a new way, what would you say the mentality shift will need to be?
Well, I think one mentality shift is really that we have to go back to science and also economics to really go back to actually finding out what is the most efficient way how we can turn the system, right? How can we reach that dream that Renat just explained? How can we ensure that money flows from the polluters to those that clean climate, clean the atmosphere, clean the environment? And that requires policymakers to really understand the fundamentals of economics, of market economics. But at the same time, we have to have a double approach, right? We have to have the head right, but also the heart right? So we need to have the narrative that is actually empowering again, positive. We need to think about the jobs that we can create. We need to think about all the good things that we can do.
Yeah, I agree. The heart must be open again in the sense that, and we have a session here that was about the Climate Hub on narratives, and I think it has become very clear. If we are getting stuck in doom and gloom, and everything is difficult, I'm not saying it's wrong. It is a bit frightening, right? But if that's our message to the public, people will just stop listening to us and just do other things, and that's dangerous. So that needs to turn around, absolutely. And I believe that carbon markets, the way way we dreamt about them, could be a very interesting catalyst for that. Again, as Marco said, think about all these projects we could fund. Think about all these jobs we could create. In principle, these markets should be a source of inspiration, of creativity. And there's nothing. It could come back there. It could absolutely come back, but there needs to be a mindset shift.
And what do you think, how long will it take to get to that mindset shift? Do you think that this can be done in the coming year or two, if we speak just about kind of more concrete timeframes?
So I was just in another session where somebody on a panel said, this crisis we have right now is so bad that something perhaps extraordinary can come out of it. So, the tension is so high that it is possible that we cannot honestly go on like that. So I have some hope and some optimism that perhaps because this is so bad what we have right now, that we flip around completely on the opposite side. But once again, that needs all our attention. And that's another reason why we wrote this book, this book is also a guide in a way. It gives you more or less all the arguments, all the views. There's NGOs, there's oil companies, there's tech companies, there's ministers. We hope you can understand the entire landscape. So you and all of us, the listeners, you understand better how to argue the case. And when the moment comes for flipping around, our camp, our team has the better story to tell, has more arguments. That's one thing we hope to achieve. Just train your brains with good arguments, why it's worth dreaming and how we can actually make it happen.
Yeah, basically, we're fighting against the crowd's paradox here. So the crowd's paradox, usually when you have a large crowd, think of soccer clubs or think of bicycle demonstrations or what else, then you're very powerful, right? A huge crowd, masses of people, they're very powerful. But in the climate movement, the opposite has happened because there's infighting about what is exactly the best and the pure and the 100% perfect way to fight climate change, and with the book we actually want to basically contribute to overcoming this infighting by really explaining the different positions and also explaining a little bit why certain things simply don't work, why they're counterproductive. So I hope that after this whole destruction that has happened in the last 2 years, we're now ready to kind of start from a blank sheet of paper.
What would you recommend to participants of the forum here, but also to everyone listening? What can we do today to kind of help change the mentality and do this mindset?
Well, I can read the book, actually. That's step one.
Yeah, I mean, again, the book's but there's different answers to this question. One is it also starts with yourself. It starts with ourselves. So I'm not going to spoil how the book ends, but I can tell you this, it ends on a really high note, on a really positive note. And first of all, what we do here in Davos on the Thursday is we are having a session followed by a dinner and drinks and a DJ. I think this community, this climate community should get out again and, start having just a good time together. My hope is that at some point, even if you don't believe in climate change, you still want to be one of us because we have the better parties, we have more fun. It's just a better crowd than the guys who are kind of on the other camp. And that is, I hope that people get inspired again, so that in spite of all the doubts and all that, you just go like, you know what? I'm going to do it anyway because I love it. I wanted to do. And that's what we're trying to achieve when we are talking about the hearts that have to be at the right place again. So there's many other answers, but I would start with that.
Yeah, absolutely. At the same time, what I really hope is that people don't kind of lose a lot of time with magical thinking. So what we had in the past was that people were saying, the world would decarbonize almost automatically if only we didn't have this distraction of carbon credits, which is, of course, not true. And we see it now, right? We see it now. Carbon credits are almost destroyed at the moment. And the oil consumption goes up like never before. It's living proof that whole magical thinking, very naive thinking, was completely wrong. And I hope that we can just now go like one step further. We don't need to have this discussion anymore. And I really want people to think about, okay, how would you try to get the dream into reality? That the polluter pays and the cleaner earns? How do you do that? Do you engage yourself politically? Or how do you get this to happen in reality and not just in a dream, in reality? Like, what are the mini steps that it takes?
And adding to the trap of magical thinking, one of our paradoxes is the novelty paradox, and it's a brutal one. Yeah. It's this tendency of human brains to be excited and inspired with the heart of new solutions that could potentially solve it all, this molecule or that geoengineering idea. And nothing against that. I was talking about just a minute ago. I love inspiration, but if that inspiration leads to saying, and that is so, because we have now this magic solution, we don't need to care much about the steps like forest conservation and all those topics, because we have this magic solution. That's dangerous. And unfortunately, that's exploited by some industries very professionally. So they say, we're going to solve the climate. in 2050 we have this magic technology, and that tends not to happen. So as much as I'm a fan of inspiration, we have to also be a little bit careful about people who sell you the one silver bullet. And actually what they want to do is just to distract yourself.
Yeah, we want dreams, but without the naivety.
That's a very good recommendation. Mm-hmm. You both mentioned such interesting points, and I have 2 follow-up questions to you. You spoke about polluters and basically the non-polluters who kind of suffer under it. And I wonder, are carbon markets really a solution for everyone? Because shouldn't polluters also reduce their carbon footprint to the point where eventually carbon markets also disappear?
Yeah, definitely. But the first step in the direction of achieving this is either you regulate this, very clear, strict regulation that simply doesn't allow the polluter to pollute, or you create a monetary incentive, because that's how the world works, right? And if you have a monetary incentive in the form of, for example, an emission trading scheme, that can work, but it needs to be very well regulated, and the price needs to increase over time, as was always in the design of all these systems. Yeah. In the absence of such a system, and we don't have a global system right now, we need to have a carbon price that kicks in. And we had that 3 years ago voluntarily because the public demanded it. The public demanded companies to take climate action, and they had to reduce their emissions. And usually once they've reached kind of the pain point where reducing further really started to kind of be very difficult for them. I mean, there are industries that really they hit rock bottom at some point, and they first need to wait until new technologies allow them to further decarbonize. And then they could basically offset the remaining emissions, right? And that was always criticized, this kind of offsetting, as a distraction of their effort to reduce their own emissions. But in the absence of offsetting, you don't have a price on carbon. Offsetting gives you a price on carbon. It gives you an incentive to actually reduce your emissions so that you have to offset as little as possible. And what we have now is an absence of the carbon price, and we have emissions skyrocketing.
Who do we need to speak to in order to kind of bring the carbon price up again?
Well,
so ultimately, price is always a function of supply and demand, as any economist can tell you. It's very simple. And right now, the problem is that this mechanism doesn't work. In some jurisdictions, it works. Some governments have. It's not all doom and gloom, even there, right? There are governments who have carbon pricing. Even in the US, you still have California, for example, with the carbon price, or the East Coast. So it's ultimately the price of carbon is a function of the political willingness to do something about the problem. And once that happens, the price will follow. So this is actually quite easy economics, actually. Brutal economics also.
We just need to convince the governments.
Correct, yeah. And then one more point I just wanted to add quickly on the question before where he said, shouldn't companies also reduce and not only offset? While writing the book, we realized that this question is probably one of the most important paradoxes why we're stuck with these markets. It was a mistake from the beginning, in hindsight, to link reduction and offsetting so much, because it's seen as a trade-off. Oh, you reduce less, you offset more. Or you offset more, you reduce less. And that trade-off is so damaging. And I just give you a simple example, a bit of a stupid example perhaps, but if you're a company and you have a goal of putting at least 50% women on the board, is that a reason for now not recycling your paper, or for not having toilets for handicapped people? That sounds stupid, right? But that's exactly what happens, right? So my point is, you should have two goals: one for the percentage of women on your board, one for the percentage of paper you recycle, plus one for the handicapped toilets. Nobody would dispute that these are separate topics, right? So can we please have two targets: one for reductions and then one for your climate finance? As we should not pitch it against each other, because the main reason why there was such a backlash against this instrument was this constant fear that offsetting could distract you from reducing. And in hindsight, the solution would have been so simple. We lost about 20 years with that wrong narrative. So I really hope on that point we can improve. We call that the offset paradox.
Perfect. Thank you so much for kind of your insights on this discussion. You briefly mentioned new technologies before and kind of new inspiration. And what we see here in Davos is that the kind of conversation is shifting towards artificial intelligence. Do you think there's any opportunity to kind of combine these two and make it a more kind of interesting topic, or to raise attention around it together?
I mean, AI is, of course, used to, for example, calculate emissions in supply chains, where it's very complicated sometimes to kind of get into all the details. I mean, of course, AI is also used, for example, in analysis of land change, where satellite imagery is basically analyzed to see how land is managed. But I think AI technologies can help the climate movement just like any other industry, but I don't have an idea on how we can make it complete. Like, how can we get that excitement that currently AI attracts, and basically shift that over to climate? I don't have an idea on that. If you have one, then let me know.
No, it's interesting. I was at the few AI sessions in Davos as well, and I think Marco is completely right. AI can absolutely help the climate movement as well, but I see a totally different issue that is not related to anything we discussed today, which is that if you look at across the road when they were discussed AI, there is so much money in the system. There's so much growth. There is the winners of this game will become so unbelievably rich that I fear that the divide between the very few people who own the code and the whole rest is going to be quite brutal. And now comes a very brutal reality, and we call that the adaptation paradox. For those people who have the money, they can adapt. For them, I can tell you, climate change, even 4 degrees, 5 degrees, is not a big topic. They have the money to adapt. The climate change affects the poor people, and I fear that the growth in AI has a certain risk to widen that gap even more. So that's unrelated here, but nonetheless, it's a paradox as well. The exact same people who would have the money to invest in climate solutions, they can also invest that money in adaptation for themselves. It's a brutal reality, but we have to put those on the table. That's the whole point of what we're trying to achieve in the book.
Yeah,
okay.
Fully agree on that. Yeah.
Then a follow-up right to this: how can carbon credits be used to really bring more of the capital to the people in these marginalized spaces that need more adaptation for themselves?
I had a conversation with an activist from Africa who was telling me, hey, she doesn't understand it. Why is there a discussion in Europe that climate action should only happen in Europe, by the European companies? She doesn't understand it because they buy all sorts of raw materials from Africa. Why don't they buy then the offsets from Africa? It's completely unlogical for the people in the global south. We have sometimes ideological discussions here in the north that are completely incomprehensible for people in the south. And I think what we need to have is education. We need to kind of bridge these worlds and really bring basically the reality of people in the south to the audience in the north. And that's what we want to do in the book, right? A big part of the book actually plays in a fictional country in the global south, where we explore exactly these situations.
Yeah, and we got in. I was really flattered. We got very good reactions from young women from Kenya, for example, who said this is the first time somebody describes the situation here the way it actually is. While most other books are just like painting a rosy picture, but this is reality, and I think that's the first step. Like, understand what's actually going on, and then act on it. And perhaps a last point on that topic, and we call this the ethics paradox. A lot of people dislike carbon credits because they say, well, we pollute here in Switzerland, we should also reduce emissions in Switzerland. It's unethical to kind of export the pollution to Africa. But it's also unethical not to do it, because as Marco just said, the people who actually suffer from climate change are in Kenya and in other African countries. So why would it be ethical to to finance only projects here in Switzerland when you could as well basically lift up a community in Kenya. So I think it's important that we see both sides of this ethics paradox.
Yeah, we're not exporting the pollution; we're exporting actually the solution.
I just think that's the argument. That
exactly. Exactly. But it's not real. It doesn't. It's not true. Yeah.
You've brought so many different interesting paradoxes that you've explained throughout your book. And I think for everyone listening to this today, this is going to be a really interesting start to really get into the reading. Kind of to round off the discussion, I'm sure we could continue for a long time because I still have a lot of questions personally. But the Climate Hub Davos really tries to foster really concrete action items and to foster partnerships between different players that come here together. What would you, going away from this conference this year, what would you say is one partnership that you would be really happy with for kind of carbon markets, or maybe even just the Climate Paradox book?
So we have, without wanting to spoil too much, but part 5 is playing in the future. And it is a little bit our vision we have, how it could play out. And what we think should happen and could happen, it's a realistic ending. It's not like a miracle happens, is different layers of people coming together in support of a certain basic narrative. You don't have to love carbon credits. You don't have to, but could we agree on certain layers? In our view, it starts with academics. We have seen many professors, PhDs writing a critical article against the projects and all that. We need some professors and academics who also research about the other side. What's the mechanism all about? What does it do? How could it work? Second layer, the NGOs. We need them in the camp. If the NGOs are fundamentally opposing the instrument, it's never going to scale again. The problem is, and you can hear it here at the Climate Hub, currently there is no alternative. Nobody has come up with a much better system yet. It's just killed. It was destroyed 2 years ago, and ever since it's just destroyed, and nothing has replaced it. So we need supporting NGOs in the camp. Then we need the companies as a next level, and then of course we need the governments who create the robust regulation around that. If you could layer those 4 parties, we would basically open the jackpot, which is everybody, the population. Once that system works, we hope that everybody would come in and say, we're going to be part of this. So that's what I hope that we can achieve here at the Climate Hub, to just sing the song and get more people in our camp from wherever you are.
Thank you. This has been a really interesting discussion. Thank you so much for all the work that you do, for sharing this book with everyone here. And it's been very inspiring to speak with you.
Thank you.
So much.
Thanks for having us.